the stagecoach rumbled into Downeyville, California, on a scorching afternoon in June of 1876, carrying a young woman whose future hung by the thread of a dozen letters exchanged with a stranger and a promise that felt more like a prayer than a plan. Dorothy. Winters pressed her palm against the dusty window, watching the ramshackle buildings of the mining town pass by, each one looking more worn than the last, while her other hand gripped her father's weathered fingers. Thomas Winters sat beside her, his 72 years evident in every line etched across his face, in the tremor that had begun in his hands 3 years ago and never stopped, in the way his breath sometimes caught when he moved too quickly. She had not told Owen Barrett about bringing her father. The letters had been practical, discussing land and cattle and the need for a wife to help run a household, but nowhere had she found the courage to mention that she would arrive with an aging parent who could no longer work, who needed care more than he could give it. Now, as the stagecoach jerked to a halt outside the small depot, Dorothy felt her stomach twist with fear that had nothing to do with meeting the man she had agreed to marry, and everything to do with the possibility that he might turn them both away. "We are here, Papa," she said softly, and her father's pale blue eyes turned to her with the same trust he had shown since she was a little girl, back when her mother was alive, and their small farm in Ohio had seemed like the whole world. "You will be a good man, Doy," her father said, using the nickname only he was allowed. "Anyone who writes with suck care for his animals will have care for people." 2. Dorothy hoped he was right. She had been 24 when she answered the advertisement in the newspaper, old enough to know that her prospects in their small Ohio tune had dwindled to nothing after her mother's death and her father's decline. The farm had been sold to pay debts, and they had been living in a boarding house on the charity of distant cousins, who made their irritation known with every passing month. The advertisement had been simple. "Rancher in California seeks honest woman for marriage, must be hardworking and kind. Land and security offered." She had written carefully describing herself truthfully, mentioning her skills in cooking, sewing, and managing a household. But she had painted around the truth of her father, saying only that she had family she cared for in her mind. She had imagined arriving alone, imagined getting established, and then perhaps mentioning later that she had a father who might visit. But as the weeks passed and the arrangements were made, she knew she could not leave him behind. He had no one else. She was all he had in this world. The stagecoach driver opened the door and helped her down, and then carefully assisted her father, whose legs were stiff from the long journey. Their trunks were hauled down and set in the dust, and Dorothy stood there in the bright sunlight. Looking around at the unfamiliar town, Downeyville sat in a valley surrounded by steep mountains, the Uber River cutting through it with a sound like distant thunder the gold rush had brought. People flooding through these mountains decades ago. And while the fever had faded, the town remained, populated by miners still hoping for lucky strikes, merchants who served them, and ranchers who worked the difficult terrain. She smoothed her gray traveling dress, knowing it was wrinkled and dusty, knowing her dark hair had come loose from its pins during the journey, knowing that she was not presenting herself at her best. Beside her, her father coughed, the sound rattling in his chest, and she put a hand on his arm to steady him. "Miss Winters." The voice came from behind her, deep and uncertain, and she turned to see a man approaching. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of physical labor and sun-darkened skin that told of years working outdoors. His hair was brown and slightly shaggy beneath his worn hat, and his eyes were a startling green that seemed to assess everything in a single glance. He looked to be in his early 30s, and there was something careful in the way he moved, as though he was aware of his own size and strength, and made efforts not to be threatening. He wore work clothes. Denim pants and a cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, boots that had seen better days, and a gun belt that she tried not to stare at. This was Owen Barrett, the man whose letters had been thoughtful and earnest, whose handwriting had been careful and precise. "Mr. Barrett," she said, and heard her own voice shake slightly. "I am Dorothy Winters. Thank you for meeting us." His eyes shifted to her father and then back to her, and she saw the question there, saw the surprise that he was too polite to voice immediately. He removed his hat and nodded to both of them. "Welcome to Downieville," Owen said. "I hope the journey was not too difficult." "It was long," Dorothy admitted. "Mr. Barrett, I must apologize. In my letters, I was not entirely forthcoming. This is my father, Thomas Winters. He has no other family, and I could not leave him behind. I understand if this changes your decision about our arrangement. I will not hold you to any obligation, but I hoped that perhaps you might understand." She held her breath while Owen looked at her father. She tried to see what he was seeing. An old man, frail and shaking, someone who would be a burden rather than a help, someone who would require care and attention and resources. She wanted to explain that her father was good and kind, that he had raised her with love after her mother died of pneumonia, that he deserved dignity in his final years, but the words stuck in her throat. Owen was quiet for a long moment, and then he stepped forward and extended his hand to Thomas. "Mr. Winters, it is an honor to meet you," Owen said. "Any father who raised a daughter brave enough to travel across the country deserves respect. You are welcome in my home for as long as you need it." Thomas shook his hand. Dorothy saw tears shine in her father's eyes. Her own throat tightened with emotion she could not name. "Thank you, son," Thomas said. "I will not be a burden to you." "Family is what makes a home, sir," Owen said simply. "I have a ranch outside of town about 5 miles north along the river. It is not much, but it is solid, and there is room. We should get going before the heat gets worse." He loaded their trunks into a wagon with practiced efficiency, and then helped Thomas up onto the seat before offering his hand to Dorothy. His palm was calloused and warm. She felt the strength in his grip as he steadied her. She settled beside her father, and Owen climbed up on the other side, taking the race with easy confidence. As they rolled out of town, Dorothy watched Owen from the corner of her eye. He had not hesitated, had not shown anger or frustration at her deception. Instead, he had welcomed her father without question. She did not know what to make of such immediate generosity. In her experience, people did not give without expecting something in return. And yet, Owen had offered his home to a stranger's father without knowing anything about him. She wanted to trust it, wanted to believe it was real, but fear made her cautious. "How long have you had your ranch?" she asked, wanting to fill the silence with something other than the sound of wagon wheels and her own anxious thoughts. 8 years, Owen replied, his eyes on the road ahead. "I came west after the war, worked for other ranchers for a while, and saved enough to buy land. It was rough country that no one else wanted, too rocky and steep for farming. But it is good for cattle if you know how to manage it. I have about 200 head now, some horses, a few pigs, chickens. I built the house myself and a barn, and some outlettings. It is not fancy, but it is mine." "It sounds like you have worked very hard," Dorothy said. "A man works hard for what matters to him." Owen said, "Land matters. Having something that cannot be taken away matters. But a ranch is not much good without people to share it with. That is why I sent for a wife." His directness surprised her. He spoke without flourish or poetry, just plain truth, laid out like cards on a table. She appreciated that more than she could say. "Why did you not court someone local?" she asked. "Surely there are women in Downieville who would have considered your offer." Owen was quiet for a moment, and she wondered if she had overstepped. Then he spoke, his voice measured. "I am not good with pretty words or social graces," he said. "I spent my youth on a farm in Missouri, and then 4 years in the war, and then years working from dawn until dark, building something from nothing. I do not know how to dance or make charming conversation. The women in town want men who can give them excitement and romance. And I understand that, but it is not who I am. I thought perhaps a woman who is willing to come west for practical reasons might be content with a practical man." Dorothy considered his words. There was no self-pity in his tone, just honest self-assessment. She found herself respecting that. "I think practical has been undervalued," she said carefully. "Romance does not put food on the table or keep the rain off your head. A good partnership built on honesty and hard work seems far more valuable to me." Owen glanced at her, and she saw something like relief in his expression. "That is what I hoped to hear," he said. They rode in more comfortable silence after that. and Dorothy watched the landscape change as they left the town behind. The road followed the river, climbing gradually into hills covered with pine and oak. The air smelled of sun-warmed earth and wild grass. So different from the thick humidity of Ohio. She could hear birds calling from the trees and once saw a deer watching them from a distance before. Bounding away, her father dozed beside her, his head nodding with the rhythm of the wagon, and she was grateful he could rest. The journey had been exhausting for him. Days of stagecoaches and trains, sleeping in strange beds, eating unfamiliar food. She had worried constantly that the travel would be too much, that he would fall ill, or that his weakness would make them unwelcome. Now, at least they had a destination, a place where they might rest. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a break in the trees, then as cleared land with fences, and finally as buildings arranged around a central yard. The house was made of wood, single-story with a wide porch across the front, the kind of structure built for function rather than beauty, but solid and well-maintained. The barn was larger than the house, a testament to Owen's priorities, and she could see a corral with horses, a chicken coop, a smokehouse, and several other smaller buildings she could not immediately identify. Everything looked neat and orderly, the result of disciplined work. There was no clutter, no disrepair. This was the home of a man who took pride in what he had built. Owen pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake before climbing down. He helped Thomas first, and Dorothy noticed the care he took, letting her father set the pace, not rushing or pulling. Then he turned to her, and again she felt the strength in his hands as he helped her down. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the slight scar on his chin, the way his jaw was set, as though he was bracing for disappointment. "Let me show you inside," Owen said. "You both must be tired and thirsty." The interior of the house was dim after the bright sunlight, and Dorothy blinked as her eyes adjusted. The main room was large, serving as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace on one wall and a black iron stove near the back. There was a wooden table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the fireplace, shelves lined with dishes and supplies, and hooks by the door for coats and hats. Everything was clean but sparse. The home of a bachelor who had not bothered with comforts he did not need. 2 doors led off the main room, presumably 2 bedrooms. "There are 2 bedrooms," Owen said, confirming her guess. "I thought perhaps your father could take one, and you and I could share the other after we are married, if that is acceptable to you." Dorothy felt her face heat. She had known, of course, that marriage would mean sharing a bed with this stranger, but hearing him say it so plainly made it suddenly real. She glanced at her father, who was looking around the room with interest, seemingly unbothered by the conversation. "That would be appropriate," she said, keeping her voice steady. "When did you plan for the wedding to take place?" "I thought perhaps we could rest today and then go into town tomorrow to see the minister," Owen said. "Unless you would prefer to wait longer, I do not want to rush you if you need time to adjust." Dorothy considered waiting would only prolong the uncertainty, would only give her more time to worry and second guesses as they had come here for this purpose, and delaying seemed pointless. "Tomorrow would be acceptable," she said. "If that suits you," Papa Thomas nodded. "No sense in waiting. Owen seems like a good man, and you will be more comfortable once things are settled." Owen looked between them, and Dorothy saw something like gratitude in his expression. "Then tomorrow it is," he said. "For now, let me show you to your room so you can rest. I will bring in your trunks and get some water for washing. Supper will be simple tonight, but I will do my best." He showed Thomas to the smaller bedroom, which had a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. Then he showed Dorothy to the larger bedroom, which was clearly his own. It had a bigger bed, more storage, and a window facing the yard. She stood in the doorway, looking at the room that would soon be hers as well, and tried to imagine sharing it with this man she barely knew. "I will sleep in the barn tonight," Owen said quietly, "to give you privacy. After we are married, I will move back in, but I want you to be comfortable." She turned to look at him, surprised again by his consideration. "Thank you," she said. "That is kind of you." We shrugged as though it was nothing. "I will get your things." As he left, Dorothy moved into the room and sat on the edge of the bed. It was firm, it's not uncomfortable, covered with a simple quilt that looked handmade. She wondered if Owen had made it himself, or if it had come from family. She realized how little she knew about him beyond the practical details in his letters. Did he have family? What had he done in the war? What did he hope for from this marriage beyond help with the household? She heard her father coughing in the next room and went to check on him. He was sitting on his bed looking tired but content. "This will do nicely," Thomas said. "He is a good man, Daddy, I can tell." "How can you tell?" she asked, sitting beside him. "We have only just met him. A man's character shows in how he treats those who can do nothing for him," Thomas said. "He welcomed me without hesitation, knowing I am no use to him. That speaks to who he is. You will be safe here. You will be cared for. That gives me peace." Dorothy took his hand, feeling the tremor that never stopped, and blinked back tears. "I want you to be happy here, Papa," she said. "I want you to be comfortable." "I am happy because you are safe," he said simply. "That is all a father needs." They sat together in silence until Owen returned with the trunks. He placed Dorothy's in her room and Thomas's in his, moving with quiet efficiency. Then he brought buckets of water from the well and set them in each room for washing. He showed them where the necessary was behind the house, where the well was located, and how to work the pump at the kitchen sink. He explained that he usually ate breakfast before dawn, dinner at midday when he came in from work, and supper after evening chores, but that they should eat whenever they were hungry and make themselves at home. He spoke in straightforward terms, giving information without embellishment, and Dorothy found herself appreciating his practical nature. "I need to tend to the animals," Owen said finally. "Please rest and make yourselves comfortable. There is bread and cheese in the cupboard and dried meat if you are hungry. I will fix something better for supper when I come back in." After he left, Dorothy helped her father wash and change into clean clothes, and then did the same for herself. It felt wonderful to get out of her travel, stained dress, and into something fresh, to wash the dust from her face and hands. She unpacked a few items from her trunk, hanging dresses in the wardrobe, placing her brush and mirror on the chest of drawers. The simple acts of settling in helped ease some of her anxiety. This was real. This was happening. Tomorrow, she would be married to a man she had met only hours ago, and her life would change in ways she could not fully predict. She checked on her father and found him sleeping. Exhausted from the journey, she covered him with a light blanket and then went to explore the main room. The house was sturdily built with tight corners and solid walls. The floor was wood, worn smooth by use, but clean. She examined the kitchen area and found it reasonably well stocked with basics: flour, salt, sugar, coffee, dried beans, preserved vegetables, and jars. There were cooking implements, pots and pans, a Dutch oven, utensils. Everything was organized in a way that suggested Owen knew his way around a kitchen, which surprised her. Many men she had known could barely boil water. She found herself looking out the window toward the barn, wondering what Owen was doing, wondering what he was thinking. Had he regretted his welcome once he had time to consider? Was he worried about having 2 more mouths to feed? She wished she could read his thoughts, but his face had been so carefully neutral, showing neither pleasure nor displeasure at the situation. She supposed that was a kind of mercy. At least he had not shown anger or resentment. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Dorothy started working on supper. She found potatoes in a storage bin and began peeling them, finding comfort in the familiar task. She located onions and carrots and decided to make a simple stew with some of the dried beef she had found. It was basic fare, but it would be hot and filling. She worked steadily, falling into rhythms she had learned at her mother's side, and tried not to think too hard about what tomorrow would bring. Owen came in as the sun was lowering, casting long shadows across the yard. He washed at the pump outside and then entered the house, hanging his hat by the door. He looked tired, but not unpleasantly so. The kind of tired that came from good work. "Something smells good," he said, and she heard genuine appreciation in his voice. "Just simple stew," Dorothy said. I hope you do not mind that I used your supplies. Mind? This is your home now. You do not need permission to cook food. He moved to the table and sat heavily. I have not had a proper meal cooked by someone else in longer than I can remember. This is a gift. His words warmed her in a way she had not expected. She dished up bowls of stew and sliced bread, and then went to wake her father. The three of them sat at the table together, and for a few minutes, there was only the sound of eating, the comfortable quiet of people too hungry to talk. Dorothy watched Owen as he ate. Noticing the way he seemed to savor each bite, the way his shoulders relaxed slightly as the meal went on. She wondered when he last had someone to cook for him to care for his comfort. This is excellent, Owen said finally. Thank you, Dorothy. It was the first time he had used her given name, and she felt the intimacy of it. The small step toward familiarity. We're welcome. She said, thank you again for welcoming us. I know this is not what you expected. Life rarely is, Owen said. But I meant what I said. Family is what makes a home. My own parents are gone, both dead before I came west. I had a brother who died in the war, and a sister who married and moved to Oregon. I have not seen her in years. This house has been empty of family for too long. Having you both here feels right, even if it is new, Thomas spoke up, his voice rough from fatigue. You are a good man, Owen Barrett. My daughter is lucky to have found you. I think I am the lucky one, Owen said quietly, and his eyes met Dorothy's across the table. There was sincerity there, and something else she could not quite name. Hope, perhaps, or possibility. After supper, Owen insisted on cleaning up while Dorothy settled her father for the night. Thomas was exhausted and fell asleep almost immediately, and Dorothy stood in his doorway for a long moment, watching him breathe, grateful that he seemed comfortable and at peace. When she returned to the main room, Owen had finished washing the dishes and was banking the fire in the stove. "No, you do not have to sleep in the barn," Dorothy said suddenly. "You could take the rocking chair, or I could, and you could have your bed. It seems wrong to make you uncomfortable in your own home." Owen straightened and looked at her. She saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not desire exactly, though there was a flicker of that, but something deeper, more complex. Loneliness maybe, and the tentative hope that it might end. "I appreciate the offer," said carefully, "but I think it is better this way. We are not yet married, and I want to do this properly. I want you to feel safe and respected. After tomorrow things will be different, but for tonight, this is how it should be." She nodded, understanding that this was important to him, that he was drawing lines for both their sakes. "Then I will see you in the morning," she said. "Good night, Dorothy." "Good night, Owen." She went to her room and closed the door and heard him leave the house a moment later. She stood in the unfamiliar space and tried to calm her racing heart. Tomorrow, she would marry this stranger. Tomorrow night, she would share this bed with him. Tomorrow. Her life would be bound to his in ways she could not undo. She had thought she was prepared for this, had thought she understood what she was agreeing to. But now that the moment was upon her, she felt the weight of it pressing down like a physical force. She changed into her nightgown and lay down. But sleep was elusive. She stared at the ceiling beams and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night. Somewhere an owl called. The wind moved through the trees with a sound like water. In the distance, cattle loaded softly. She thought about Owen in the barn, wondered if he was sleeping, or if he was lying awake, too. Thinking about what came next, she thought about her father in the next room. Finally able to rest without worry after so many months of uncertainty, she thought about her mother. Dead these 3 years, and wished she could ask her advice. What would her mother have said about this marriage, this leap into the unknown? But she knew the answer. Her mother had been practical, had understood that survival sometimes required hard choices. She would have approved of Owen's steadiness, his obvious competence, his kindness. She would have said that love could grow from respect and partnership, that passion was less important than reliability. Dorothy held on to that thought as she finally drifted toward sleep. She did not need passion. She needed security and safety for herself and her father. If Owen could provide that, then the rest would be enough. It would have to be. Morning came early on the ranch. Dorothy woke to the sound of roosters crowing. An early light filtering through the window. She dressed quickly in her best dress. A deep blue cotton with a high collar and long sleeves. Appropriate for a wedding, even if it was not fancy. She pinned her dark hair up carefully and looked at herself in the small mirror Owen had in the room. She looked pale and nervous, but presentable. This would have to do. She found Owen already in the kitchen making coffee. He looked up when she entered, and she saw him take in her appearance with a look that might have been appreciation. "You look nice," he said simply. "Thank you, so do you." It was true. He had clearly made an effort, wearing clean dark pants and a white shirt that looked new. His hair combed back and damp from washing. He looked handsome in a rough, unpolished way that suited him. "I thought we could have breakfast and then head into town," Owen said. "The minister usually has time in the mornings. We can stop at the general store after and pick up any supplies you need." "That sounds fine," Dorothy said, and was proud that her voice did not shake. Her father joined them, moving slowly but in good spirits. They ate a simple breakfast of bread and eggs, making small talk about the ranch, about the weather, about nothing important. Dorothy could barely taste the food, her stomach too tight with nerves. Owen seemed calm, but she noticed he did not eat much either. The ride into town was quiet. Dorothy sat between Owen and her father, acutely aware of Owen's presence beside her, the way his arm brushed hers. When the wagon hit ruts in the road, she tried to imagine what it would be like to touch him intentionally, to be held by him, to share intimacy with him. And her mind shied away from the thoughts. She had been kissed twice in her life, both times by the same boy back in Ohio. Chaste pecks that had meant nothing and led nowhere. She was 24 years old and had never been touched by a man with any real passion. She did not know what to expect. Did not know if Owen would be patient or demanding, gentle or rough. The uncertainty terrified her more than she wanted to admit. Downieville was busier in the morning with people moving about on various errands. Owen guided the wagon to the small white church at the edge of town and helped them down. The minister was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a brisk manner, and he seemed unsurprised by their request. Likely mail-order marriages were common enough in these parts. "You have witnesses?" the minister asked, and Owen nodded to two men who happened to be passing, asking if they would spare a few minutes. They agreed with good-natured shrugs. Suddenly everything was moving very fast. Dorothy stood in the small church with Owen beside her, her father behind her, and two complete strangers as witnesses, and listened as the minister read through the marriage ceremony. The words washed over her in a blur. Love, honor, cherish, for better or worse, in sickness and health until death. Such enormous promises to make to someone she had known for less than a day. When the minister asked if she took Owen to be her lawfully wedded husband, she heard her own voice say, "I do." With surprising firmness, Owen's response was equally steady. Then Owen was sliding a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring that was slightly too large, but that he promised to have sized. And the minister was pronouncing them man and wife. "You may kiss your bride," the minister said. And Dorothy's heart lurched. Owen turned to her and she saw the question in his eyes, the request for permission. She nodded slightly, and he leaned down to press his lips to hers. It was brief and chaste. Over almost before it began, but she felt the warmth of his mouth, the scratch of his beard, the controlled strength in the way he held her shoulders. Then he pulled back and she saw color in his cheeks that might have been embarrassment or pleasure. "Congratulations," the minister said cheerfully, accepting the payment Owen handed him. The witnesses offered their best wishes and went on their way. And just like that, it was done. She was Dorothy Barrett, now wife to a rancher, stepmother to his land and livestock, bound to him by law and before God. They completed their business at the general store. Where Owen insisted she'd choose whatever supplies she thought they needed, she selected practical items. Flour and sugar, fabric for making clothes, thread and needles, some small luxuries, like tea and dried fruit. Owen paid without comment, and she was grateful he did not question her choices or make her feel as though she was being extravagant. They loaded the supplies into the wagon and began the journey. Back to the ranch. "How are you feeling?" Owen asked her quietly, and she appreciated that he was trying to gauge her state of mind. Overwhelmed, she admitted. But all right, it is strange to be married. It's very strange, Owen agreed. But I hope it will become less so with time. I want you to be happy, Dorothy. I want this to be a good home for you and your father. I will do my best to be a good wife, she said. I know how to work hard. I will earn my place here. You do not have to earn anything, Owen said. You belong here now by right, not by merit. I hope you will come to believe that. His words touched something deep inside her, a place that had been tense and afraid for so long. She blinked back unexpected tears and nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Back at the ranch, Owen helped them unload the supplies and then excused himself to tend to the cattle. Dorothy spent the afternoon organizing the kitchen the way she wanted it, putting away the new supplies, planning meals in her head. Her father napped, the excitement of the day having tired him. She worked steadily, finding comfort in domestic tasks, trying not to think about the coming night. Supper was another simple meal. Chicken she had found in the cold cellar, fried with potatoes and greens. They ate together again, the three of them. And this time, the conversation flowed more easily. Owen told them about the ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in the mountains, about the winters that came hard and fast and buried everything in snow. Thomas talked about his younger days, about the farm in Ohio, about Dorothy's mother. Dorothy listened and contributed when appropriate, but mostly she watched Owen, trying to learn him, trying to understand the man she had married. After supper, Thomas excused himself early, and Dorothy suspected he was trying to give them privacy. She cleaned up the kitchen while Owen sat at the table, carving a piece of wood with a small knife. She watched his hands, noticing the skill and patience in the work. "What are you making?" she asked. "A horse," he said, holding it up to show her. It was rough still, but she could see the shape emerging. "I make small things in the evening sometimes. It keeps my hands busy." "It is good," she said. "You have talent," he shrugged. "It is just whittling, nothing special." They fell into silence. Dorothy felt the tension building. They were alone now, married, expected to retire together. Her hands trembled slightly as she hung the dishcloth to dry. "Dorothy," Owen said, and she turned to look at him. He had set down his carving and was watching her with an expression that was hard to read. "I want you to know that I understand you must be nervous. We do not know each other well, and I do not expect you to feel comfortable with me yet. We will share a bed because we are married, and that is proper. But I will not force my attentions on you. I will wait until you are ready. That might be tonight, or next week, or next month. I will wait as long as it takes." Dorothy stared at him, surprised and moved by his words. She had expected him to claim his rights as a husband, had been bracing herself for awkwardness and discomfort. Instead, he was offering her time and choice. "That is very kind of you," she said softly. "I appreciate your patience. I want to be a proper wife to you, but you are right that I am nervous. I do not know what to expect. Neither do I, if I am being honest," Owen said. And she saw vulnerability in his expression. "I have not been with many women. I do not know if I will be a good husband in that way, but I will try to be gentle and considerate. When the time comes, we will figure it out together." The honesty of his admission made her feel less alone in her anxiety. They were both navigating unfamiliar territory, both uncertain. There was something reassuring in that. "Perhaps we should just go to bed," she said, "and see how we feel." Owen nodded and stood. "That sounds wise." They prepared for bed in the awkward way of strangers. Forced into intimacy, Dorothy changed in the bedroom while Owen stepped outside. And when she was in her nightgown and under the covers, she called him in. He changed quickly, keeping his back to her. And she tried not to look at the expanse of his shoulders and back, the muscles defined by years of labor. Then he was slipping under the covers on the other side of the bed. They lay there in the darkness, not touching, both staring at the ceiling. "Good night, Dorothy," Owen said. "Good night, Owen." She expected to lie awake for hours, but exhaustion from the emotional day pulled her under faster than anticipated. The last thing she was aware of was the sound of Owen's breathing. steady and calm beside her, and the unexpected feeling of safety that came from not being alone. Days turned into weeks, and a routine established itself on the ranch. Dorothy rose early to make breakfast, and Owen ate quickly before heading out to work. She spent her days keeping the house. Tending the garden Owen had started but not maintained well. Caring for her father and preparing meals, Thomas helped where he could. Shelling peas, peeling vegetables, watching over things while Dorothy did laundry or heavier work. Owen came in for dinner at midday, usually hungry and dirty, and they would sit together and talk about small things. Then he would return to work until evening, when they would have supper and spend a few hours together before bed. The sleeping arrangements remained chaste. They shared the bed, but Owen kept to his side and Dorothy to hers. A careful distance maintained between them. Sometimes she woke in the night and found they had moved closer in sleep, her head near his shoulder or his hand resting near her hip, but they never spoke of it in the daylight. The tension was there, an awareness of each other that seemed to grow stronger rather than fade, but neither of them pushed for more. Dorothy found herself watching Owen during the days, noticing things about him. The way he spoke gently to the horses, the care he took with the cattle, the pride he had in his work, the way he always thanked her for meals, the way he asked her opinion on small decisions, the way he spoke respectfully to her father and listened to Thomas's stories with genuine interest. She saw his kindness, his integrity, his quiet strength. She began to understand why he had sought a wife through correspondence rather than courting. He was not a man for grand gestures or flowery words, but there was a deep steadiness to him that was far more valuable. She also noticed the way he looked at her, sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention. There was hunger there, but also restraint and something softer that might have been affection. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. Whether he found her attractive, whether he was happy with his choice of bride. She caught herself caring about his opinion more than she expected, wanting him to be pleased with her. One evening in late July, about a month after their wedding, they were sitting on the porch after supper. Her father had already gone to bed, and the night was warm and pleasant. Owen was whittling again, working on what looked like a bird this time, and Dorothy was mending a shirt. They worked in companionable silence, and she felt a contentment that surprised her. This was peaceful. This was good. She had not expected to feel so settled so quickly. Dorothy, Owen said, and she looked up. I want to thank you for everything you have done this past month. The house has never been so comfortable. The meals are wonderful. You have been kind to me and patient with this situation. I know it is not what you might have hoped for when you imagined marriage, but I am grateful you are here. His words made warmth spread through her chest. I am grateful too, she said. You have been so good to my father and to me. I feel safe here. I feel like this is becoming home. That is more than I hoped for. Owen set down his carving and turned to face her fully. I have been thinking, he said carefully, about our marriage, about the way things are between us. I do not want to pressure you, but I find myself wanting more than what we have, not just in terms of physical relations. Though I admit I think about that, but I want to be closer to you. I want to know you better. I want this to be a real marriage in every sense. Dorothy sat down,
her mending, her heart beating faster. I want that too, she admitted. I have been afraid, but not of you. Of failing, maybe of not knowing how to be what you need. But I trust you, Owen. I have come to care for you more than I expected to. I would like us to be truly married. Owen reached out and took her hand, the first time he had touched her intentionally since their wedding kiss. His hand was warm and rough and strong, and she felt something shift inside her at the contact. Then perhaps we could start by courting a bit, Owen said. I never got to court you properly. Maybe I could take you on a ride around the property tomorrow, show you the parts of the ranch you have not seen. We could pack a lunch and spend some time together without work getting in the way. Would you like that? I would like that very much, Dorothy said, and meant it. And tonight, Owen continued, his voice dropping lower, perhaps we could just be close. I do not need to rush anything, but I would like to hold you if you would allow it. I want to feel like you are my wife in truth. Dorothy felt her face heat, but she nodded. I would like that too. They finished their work and went inside, banking the stove and checking that everything was secure for the night. In the bedroom, they prepared for sleep with less awkwardness than usual, perhaps because they had acknowledged what they both wanted. When they slipped under the covers, Owen reached for her and she went to him willingly. He pulled her close so her head rested on his chest, his arm around her shoulders, and she felt the warmth of his body all along her side. It was the closest she had ever been to anyone, and she felt her heart racing, but it was not fear. It was anticipation and a kind of nervous excitement. "Is this all right?" Owen asked, and she heard the rumble of his voice through his chest. "Yes," she said, "this is good." They lay like that for a long time, not speaking, just holding each other. Dorothy listened to Owen's heartbeat, felt the rise and fall of his breathing, and slowly relaxed into his embrace. His hand moved gently up and down her arm, a soothing motion that made her feel cherished. She had not realized how much she had craved physical affection, how lonely she had been for touch. This simple holding felt like a gift. "Dorothy," Owen said quietly, "may I kiss you?" She lifted her head to look at him, and in the dim moonlight coming through the window, she could see his face, see the question and hope there. "Yes," she whispered. He leaned down and kissed her, and this time it was not the brief, chaste kiss of their wang. This was slow and exploratory, his lips moving gently against hers, learning the shape and taste of her. She kissed him back, following his lead, and felt something warm unfurl in her belly. His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb stroking her cheek, and she made a small sound that might have been surprise or pleasure. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing harder. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," Owen admitted. "You are so beautiful, and every day I watch you and want to touch you, but I did not want to scare you." "I am not scared," Dorothy said, and realized it was true. "I want you to touch me. I want to be your wife in every way." Owen's eyes darkened with desire, but he moved carefully, as though afraid of breaking the moment. He kissed her again, and this time his hand moved from her face down to her shoulder, her arm, her waist. She felt the heat of his palm through the thin fabric of her nightgown and pressed closer to him. His kisses moved from her mouth to her jaw, her neck, and she gasped at the sensation, at the way it made her body respond. She had not known it could feel like this, had not understood the intensity of physical desire. They explored each other slowly that night, learning what pleased and what felt awkward, what made them gasp and what made them laugh. Owen was patient and gentle, always asking if she was comfortable, always stopping if she seemed uncertain. When he finally made her fully his wife, it was with care and tenderness that made tears spring to her eyes. There was discomfort, yes, but also a strange sense of rightness, of two bodies learning to fit together, of a connection forming that went deeper than just physical pleasure. Afterward, he held her close and whispered words of praise and affection, telling her she was wonderful, that she was his, that he would take care of her always. Dorothy lay in his arms and felt something inside her settle into place. This was her husband, this was her home, this was her life now, and it was good. The next morning, everything felt different. There was a new ease between them, an intimacy that showed in small touches and knowing looks. Owen kissed her before leaving for his morning work, and she felt herself blush with pleasure. Her father noticed the change and smiled at her with understanding, clearly pleased that the marriage was becoming real. True to his word, Owen took her on a ride around the property that afternoon. They packed a lunch and rode out on two of his gentler horses, and he showed her the extent of his land. It was more than she had realized, hundreds of acres of rocky, beautiful terrain. He showed her where the cattle grazed in different seasons, where the streams ran that provided water, where the boundaries of his property lay.
He spoke with pride and love about every inch of it, and she understood that this land was not just his livelihood, but his identity, the proof of what he had built from nothing. They stopped by a stream to eat lunch, and Owen helped her down from her horse. They sat on a flat rock and ate bread and cheese and apples and talked about everything and nothing. He told her more about his past, about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about losing his family to illness and war, about his decision to come west and start over. She told him about her childhood, about her mother's death, about the fear of ending up alone with no way to care for her father. They talked about hopes and dreams, about what they wanted to build together. "I want children someday," Owen said, "if you are willing. I want sons and daughters to teach and raise, to leave this ranch to. I want a family." "I want that too," Dorothy said. "I always imagined having children, but I thought the chance had passed me by. I'm 24 already. I worried I had waited too long." 24 is not old," Owen said, smiling, "and you are healthy and strong. I think we could have a house full of children if we wanted." The thought made Dorothy's heart swell. Children, a family, a future that held more than just survival. She reached for Owen's hand and squeezed it. "I would like that very much," she said. They rode back to the ranch in high spirits, and that night in bed they came together with more confidence, with growing understanding of how to please each other. Dorothy discovered that physical intimacy could be joyful, that her body was capable of pleasure she had never imagined. Owen was an attentive lover, focused on her enjoyment as much as his own, and she felt herself falling for him in a way she had not anticipated. This was not the practical partnership she had expected. This was
becoming something deeper, something that felt like love. Summer turned to fall and the work on the ranch intensified. Owen was preparing for winter, putting up hay, moving cattle to lower pastures, making repairs to buildings before the snow came. Dorothy worked alongside him when she could, and they developed a rhythm that felt natural. She also continued to care for her father, who seemed to be doing better in the clean mountain air. His tremor had not improved, but he was eating well and sleeping well, and he seemed content in a way he had not been for years. He spent his days helping with small tasks, talking with Owen when he came in for meals, and sitting on the porch watching the mountains. Dorothy was grateful every day that Owen had welcomed him without hesitation, that her father had a place to rest and be valued. In late September, Dorothy began to suspect she might be with child. Her monthly courses had not come, and she felt different, a strange fluttering in her belly that might have been nerves or might have been something more. She waited a few more weeks to be sure, and when a second month passed without her courses, she knew she was carrying Owen's baby. She told him one evening as they sat together on the porch. He had been whittling, and she had been knitting, trying to work up the courage to speak. Finally, she just said, "Owen, I am with child." He stopped carving and looked at her, his eyes wide with shock and then joy. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without a doctor," she said. "2 months now without my courses, and I feel different. I think it is real." Owen set down his carving and pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "A baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Our baby, Dorothy. This is the best news I could have imagined." She held him and felt tears on her cheeks, happy tears that she did not try to hide. "I am so glad," she said. "I was afraid you might think it was too soon, but I am glad." "Too soon? How could it be too soon?" Owen pulled back to look at her, his hands on her shoulders. "I want this. I want a family with you. This is everything I hoped for." They went inside and told Thomas, who was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming a grandfather in truth, not just in name. He hugged Dorothy and shook Owen's hand and wiped at his own tears. That night, the three of them sat together and talked about the future, about names and preparations and all the things they would need. Dorothy felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. She had come to California expecting duty and security, and instead she had found love and joy and hope. Winter came hard and fast, as Owen had predicted. Snow buried the ranch in December, and they found themselves largely confined to the house for weeks at a time. Owen still went out daily to tend the animals, but he did not venture far. They spent long evenings together, the three of them, playing cards, reading, talking. Dorothy knitted baby clothes with yarn Owen had bought on their last trip to town before the snow. Her belly grew slowly but steadily, and Owen was fascinated by every change in her body, touching her belly reverently and talking to their child, even though it could not possibly hear him yet. The isolation of winter brought them even closer. They talked about everything during those long, dark evenings. They shared stories from their pasts, dreams for the future, fears and hopes and secret thoughts. Dorothy learned that Owen had nightmares sometimes from the war, that he woke shaking and had to be reminded where he was. She learned to hold him through those times, to soothe him back to sleep. Owen learned that Dorothy had always wanted to learn to read music, but had never had the opportunity. And he promised that when the baby was older, they would travel to a city where she could take lessons. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, learned how to comfort and support, learned how to be partners in the truest sense. In January, a bad storm blew through that lasted 3 days. The wind howled and the snow piled higher than Dorothy had ever seen. Owen worried about the cattle, worried about the barn holding, worried about their supplies lasting. But they made it through, all of them safe, the animals protected, the house warm. On the third night, as the storm finally began to ease, Thomas suffered a coughing fit that would not stop. Dorothy and Owen both worked to ease him, giving him water, propping him up, rubbing his back, but the cough continued. By morning he was feverish and weak, his breathing labored. "It is pneumonia," Owen said grimly. "We need to get him to a doctor." "We cannot travel in this," Dorothy said, looking out at the deep snow. "The wagon would never make it." "Then I will ride," Owen said. "I will get the doctor and bring him back here." "That is too dangerous," Dorothy protested. "You could get lost in the snow, or freeze to death, or the horse could fall." "Your father needs help," Owen said firmly. "I am going. You stay with him and keep him warm. I will be back as soon as I can." Dorothy wanted to argue, wanted to beg him not to go, but she saw the determination in his face and knew it was useless. She helped him bundle up in every warm thing they had, and then watched from the door as he rode out into the white landscape, disappearing quickly into the blowing snow. She stood there long after he was gone, praying silently that he would make it safely, that he would return, that she would not lose him. The hours that followed were the longest of her life. She sat with her father, bathing his face with cool water, giving him sips of tea, trying to ease his breathing. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes calling for her mother, sometimes seeming to know where he was. Dorothy held his hand and talked to him, told him to hold on, that help was coming, that Owen would return. But as the hours stretched with no sign of Owen, she began to fear the worst. What if he had not made it? What if he was lost in the snow, freezing to death, while she sat here helpless? The thought made her sick with terror.
It was late afternoon when she finally heard horses. She ran to the door and flung it open to see Owen riding up with another man behind him, both of them covered in snow and ice. Relief flooded through her so strongly her knees nearly gave out. Owen was alive. He had made it. The doctor was an older man named Hutchkins who had been practicing in Downieville for 20 years. He examined Thomas quickly and confirmed it was pneumonia, then set about treating him with medicines and techniques Dorothy did not fully understand. Owen, meanwhile, had collapsed by the fire, shaking with cold and exhaustion. Dorothy wanted to stay with her father, but she also needed to care for Owen. She helped him out of his frozen clothes, wrapped him in blankets, made him hot coffee, rubbed warmth back into his hands and feet. He protested that he was fine, but she could see how close he had come to real danger. "You could have died," she said, and her voice broke. "You could have frozen out there, and I would have lost you. You know what that would have done to me?" Owen looked at her with tired eyes. "I had to try," he said. "Your father needed help. I could not just let him die without doing everything possible." "I know," she said, and kissed him, tasting snow and cold on his lips. "I know. Thank you. Thank you for being brave and good, but do not scare me like that again. I need you. We need you." She put a hand on her belly, and he covered it with his own. "I am sorry," he said. "I will be more careful. I promise." Dr. Hutchkins stayed for 2 days monitoring Thomas and administering treatments. Slowly, painfully, Thomas began to improve. The fever broke, the cough eased, and he was able to breathe more easily. It was clear he would survive, though the doctor warned that his lungs were weak and he needed to be kept warm and dry. Dorothy was so grateful she could barely speak. She had been prepared to lose her father, had felt death hovering close, and having him pulled back from that edge felt like a miracle. When the doctor finally left, accepting Owen's payment and promising to check back when the weather allowed, Dorothy sat with her father and cried with relief. Thomas held her hand and smiled weakly. "You married a good man, Daddy," he said. "He risked his life for an old man he barely knows. That is the mark of true character." "I know, Papa," she said. "I know. I am so lucky. We both are." As winter slowly gave way to spring, life on the ranch resumed its rhythms. Thomas recovered fully, though he was weaker than before and tired more easily. Dorothy's belly grew round and full, and by March she could feel the baby moving inside her, little kicks and flutters that never failed to amaze her. Owen was endlessly fascinated, putting his hand on her belly to feel the movement, talking to the baby about the ranch and the mountains and all the things they would do together. In April, Dorothy went into labor. It was a long and difficult birth, lasting through a day and a night, and there were moments when both she and Owen were frightened that something would go wrong. But with her father coaching her through it, reminding her of her mother's strength, and Owen holding her hand and wiping her face, she pushed through the pain. As dawn broke on the second day, she gave one final push and heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the sharp cry of a newborn baby. "A boy," Owen said, his voice choked with emotion. "We have a son." Dr. Hutchkins, who had been fetched when the labor started, cleaned the baby and checked him over, then pronounced him healthy and strong. He placed the infant in Dorothy's arms, and she looked down at the tiny red-faced creature with wonder. He had dark hair, and his eyes, though still unfocused, seemed to be the same green as Owen's. He was perfect. He was theirs. "What shall we name him?" she asked Owen, who was staring at their son with an expression of pure awe. "I was thinking about that," Owen said. "What about Thomas after your father, if that would be all right with you?" Dorothy looked over at her father, who was standing in the doorway with tears streaming down his face, and felt her heart swell. "Thomas Owen Barrett," she said. "That is perfect."
Baby Thomas was a good baby, healthy and hungry, and Dorothy fell into motherhood with a mixture of exhaustion and joy. Owen was a devoted father, holding the baby whenever he could, changing him, rocking him when he fussed. He carved a beautiful cradle from pine and placed it beside their bed so Thomas could sleep close by. The ranch work continued, but Owen made time every day to be with his wife and son, to be present in these early, precious days. Summer came again, bringing warm weather and long days. Dorothy's father doted on his grandson, holding him gently despite his tremor, singing old songs, telling him stories he was too young to understand. Dorothy worked to regain her strength, slowly taking on more household tasks as she recovered from the birth. Owen hired a young man from town to help with the ranch work for a few months, giving himself more time to be with his family. They fell into new routines, organizing their lives around the baby's needs, learning to be parents together. One evening in late July, almost exactly 2 years after Dorothy had arrived in Downieville, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Thomas, the elder, was napping inside, and baby Thomas was asleep in his mother's arms. Owen had his arm around Dorothy, and they sat in contented silence, watching the sky turn brilliant shades of orange and pink. "Are you happy?" Owen asked, and Dorothy heard the vulnerability in the question, the hope that he had given her what she needed. "I am happier than I ever imagined I could be," Dorothy said honestly. "When I got on that stagecoach, I was so frightened. I thought I was leaving everything behind, going towards an uncertain future with a stranger. But I found you, and you have given me everything I ever wanted. A home, security, love, a family. I am so grateful, Owen. Every day I am grateful." "I am the grateful one," Owen said. "You brought life to this place. You brought warmth and laughter and purpose. Before you came, I was just surviving, working and sleeping and working again. Now I have reasons for everything I do. I work to provide for you and Thomas. I build for our future. I dream about what our children will do with this land someday. You gave me that. You gave me a real life." They kissed as the sun set, the baby between them, secure in the love of their parents. Inside, Thomas Winter slept peacefully, grateful for the years he had been given in this good place with this good man who had welcomed him without question. This was family. This was home. The years that followed were good years, marked by hard work and deep contentment. Baby Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler, always underfoot, always curious, always getting into mischief. In the spring of 1878, Dorothy gave birth to a daughter they named Rose after Owen's mother. She had Dorothy's dark hair and a sunny disposition that charmed everyone who met her.
Thomas the elder doted on both children, spending hours entertaining them, teaching them songs and games, giving Dorothy and Owen precious time to keep up with the endless demands of the ranch. In 1880, another son arrived, named William, for Dorothy's grandfather. The house seemed to shrink with 3 small children, and Owen began planning an addition, extra bedrooms to give everyone more space. They were bursting at the seams, but in the best possible way, surrounded by noise and life and love. Thomas Winters lived to see all 3 of his grandchildren born, and he passed peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1881, having spent his final years in comfort and dignity, surrounded by family who loved him. Dorothy grieved deeply, but found comfort in knowing that his last years had been good ones, that Owen had given him a place to belong when he had nowhere else to go. They buried him on the ranch, on a hillside with a view of the mountains, and planted a tree over his grave that would grow tall and strong, a living memorial. The ranch continued to prosper under Owen's careful management.
He expanded his herd, improved his land, and gained a reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher. Dorothy managed the household with competence and grace, raising their children, maintaining their home, and supporting Owen in all his endeavors. They worked together as true partners, making decisions jointly, respecting each other's opinions, building something that would last. In 1883, Dorothy gave birth to twins, 2 more boys they named James and Joseph. The house was truly bursting now, and Owen finished the addition, creating a large, rambling home that accommodated their growing family. With 5 children, life was chaotic and exhausting, but also rich with joy. Meal times were loud affairs, with everyone talking at once. Bedtimes required both parents working together to get everyone settled. The ranch rang with the sounds of children playing, laughing, arguing, learning. Owen taught his sons to ride and work cattle, to care for animals, to respect the land. Dorothy taught all her children to read and write, to cook and sew, to be kind and honest. Together they instilled values of hard work, integrity, and family loyalty. The Barrett children grew up knowing they were loved and wanted, knowing they had a place in the world that could not be taken from them. In 1885, Owen and Dorothy celebrated 10 years of marriage. They took a rare trip alone, leaving the children in the care of a trusted neighbor, and spent 3 days in a hotel in Sacramento. It was strange to be alone together after so many years of constant noise and activity. Strange to sleep through the night without being woken by a crying baby. Strange to have conversations without interruption. But it was also wonderful, a chance to reconnect as husband and wife, to remember why they had fallen in love. "You ever regret it?" Dorothy asked him one night, as they lay in a real bed with actual springs and a feather mattress, such luxury compared to their simple bed at home. Marrying a stranger, taking on her father, ending up with 5 children and all the chaos that brings. Owen pulled her close and kissed her forehead. "Not for 1 second," he said. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Our family is the best thing that ever happened to me. I love the chaos. I love the noise. I love coming home and having children run to greet me. I love sitting at the table with all of you. I love every single moment, even the hard ones. You gave me all of this, Dorothy. You gave me a reason to live instead of just survive." "You gave me the same," Dorothy said. "I was so lost when I came here, so afraid and uncertain. You welcomed me with such kindness, such generosity. You gave me and my father a home when we had nowhere to go. You showed me what real love looks like, what real partnership means. I love you, Owen Barrett. I have loved you for a long time now, but I do not think I have said it enough." "I love you too," Owen said, "more than I have words for. You are my heart, Dorothy. You and our children. You are everything." They made love that night with the passion of people who had grown to know each other intimately, who understood exactly how to please and be pleased, who had built trust and affection into something unbreakable. In the morning they woke late, had a leisurely breakfast, and talked about their dreams for the future. More children, perhaps, though 5 was quite enough for now. Improvements to the ranch, education for the children, growing old together, watching their grandchildren play in the same yard where their children played now. When they returned home, the children mobbed them, and the house seemed smaller and louder than ever, and Dorothy had never been happier. This was her life, this chaotic, beautiful, exhausting, wonderful life, and she would not change a single thing.
The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. Young Thomas grew into a responsible young man who clearly had his father's gift for ranching. Rose developed a talent for drawing and spent hours sketching the animals and landscapes around her. William was the most bookish of the children, always reading, always asking questions. The twins, James and Joseph, were inseparable and got into more trouble than all the others combined. Together they made the ranch ring with life and laughter. In 1890, Dorothy gave birth one final time to another daughter they named Margaret. At 39, she thought her childbearing years were behind her, but this last surprise was welcomed with joy. Margaret was doted on by her older siblings, who took turns helping to care for her, and she grew up with an army of protectors. Owen was 50 now, his hair going gray at the temples, his face lined by years in the sun, but he was still strong, still capable, still devoted to his family and his land. He had built something remarkable from nothing, a thriving ranch that would support his children and grandchildren, a home filled with love and stability, a legacy that would endure. Dorothy was 39, her dark hair threaded with silver, her body marked by the bearing and raising of 6 children. She was tired often, overwhelmed sometimes, but deeply content. She looked at her life and saw abundance, saw purpose, saw meaning in every day. They stood together one evening in 1892, watching their children play in the yard. Young Thomas, now 16, and nearly as tall as his father, was teaching the younger ones to lasso a fence post. Rose, 14, was sitting under a tree with a sketchbook. William, 12, was reading to the twins, who were 10, and pretending to listen. The twins, James and Joseph, were inseparable and got into more trouble than all the others combined. Together they made the ranch ring with life and laughter. "Family is what makes a home," Owen said, echoing the words he had spoken so many years ago when he first welcomed Dorothy and her father. "I believed it when I said it, but I did not fully understand it. Now I do. This is what I was meant to build, not just a ranch, but this, all of this." Dorothy leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her. "We built it together," she said, "every bit of it, you and me, partner to partner, husband and wife. This is our legacy, these children, this land, this love. This is what will endure." They stood together as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Dorothy thought about that frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 16 years ago, clutching her father's hand, terrified of the future. She wished she could go back and tell that girl that everything would be all right, that she would find not just security, but joy, not just shelter, but home, not just a husband, but a true partner and love.
She wished she could tell her father, resting on that hillside beneath the tree, that she was happy, that his sacrifice in raising her had led to this beautiful life, that his trust in Owen had been well placed, but she could not go back, could only move forward. And as she stood there, with Owen's arm around her, with their children playing before them, with the ranch stretching out in all directions, she knew that forward was exactly where she wanted to go. The Barrett family continued to grow and thrive in Downeyville for generations to come. Young Thomas took over the ranch when Owen finally retired in his 60s, proving to be as capable and dedicated as his father. Rose married a schoolteacher and moved to Sacramento, but visited often, bringing her own children to play where she had played. William became a lawyer and served their community with honor. The twins went into business together, opening a successful mercantile in town. Margaret, the baby, surprised everyone by becoming a nurse and dedicating herself to caring for others. Owen and Dorothy lived to see grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren, lived to celebrate 50 years of marriage, lived to watch their legacy spread far beyond what they had imagined. They grew old together with grace and dignity, still holding hands on the porch in the evenings, still finding comfort in each other's presence, still grateful every day for the chance encounter that had brought them together. When Owen passed in 1910 at the age of 70, Dorothy grieved deeply but found comfort in knowing they had had a full life together, that they had built something that would endure. She lived 5 more years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her, telling stories of the old days, of traveling west to marry a stranger, of finding love when she least expected it. She died peacefully in 1915 at the age of 64 in the same bed where she had slept beside Owen for so many years, in the house he had built with his own hands. They buried her beside him on that hillside, next to her father, 3 graves together overlooking the land they had loved. The tree Thomas Winters had been buried under had grown tall and strong, and it shaded all 3 graves, a living testament to the family that had been built here, to the love that had made it possible. The ranch continued, passed down through generations of Barretts, each one adding to it, improving it, but always remembering the foundation that Owen and Dorothy had laid. The story of how the ranch began, of the mail-order bride who brought her aging father, of the rancher who said family is what makes a home, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a story of courage and kindness, of taking chances and building trust, of love growing from unlikely beginnings. And in that small corner of California, in the shadow of the Sierra Nevada mountains, along the banks of the Yuba River, the Barrett family continued to prove year after year, generation after generation, that family truly is what makes a home, and that love, when built on a foundation of respect and partnership and mutual care, can create something that lasts forever. The ranch itself stood testament to that truth. The buildings Owen had constructed still stood, maintained and improved by his descendants, but essentially unchanged. The land he had worked so hard to tame and nurture continued to produce, supporting each new generation. The values he and Dorothy had instilled, hard work, integrity, family loyalty, kindness to strangers, continued to guide their children and grandchildren. In 1976, on the 100th anniversary of Dorothy's arrival in Downeyville, the Barrett family held a reunion on the ranch. Nearly 200 descendants gathered, coming from all over California and beyond, to celebrate their heritage. They stood on that hillside where Owen, Dorothy, and Thomas were buried, and they told the old story again, making sure the youngest generation knew where they came from, knew the courage and love that had started it all. An old woman stood before the graves, great-great-granddaughter to Owen and Dorothy, and spoke to the assembled family. 100 years ago, she said, a young woman made a choice that would echo through time. She chose courage over fear, hope over despair. She traveled across the country to marry a stranger, bringing her aging father with her, not knowing if they would be welcome, not knowing if they would survive. And she met a man who understood something fundamental, something too many people forget. He understood that family is what makes a home, not blood, but choice, not convenience, but commitment. Owen Barrett chose to welcome strangers into his home and his life, and from that choice, all of us descended. We are here because 2 people decided to be brave, to be kind, to build something together. May we never forget their example. May we carry forward their legacy of love and welcome and family.
The crowd stood in silence for a moment, honoring the memory of ancestors, most of them they had never met, but whose impact shaped every life present. Then they dispersed to celebrate, to eat and talk and reconnect, to strengthen the bonds of family that reached across generations. The sun set that evening over the Barrett Ranch as it had set so many thousands of times before, painting the sky in brilliant colors, illuminating the land that had been loved and worked and passed down through 5 generations. The house stood solid and welcoming, lights glowing in the windows, filled with laughter and voices and life. The barn sheltered animals as it always had. The fences marked boundaries that had been maintained for a century. And on that hillside, 3 graves rested in peace, shaded by a massive tree, surrounded by the evidence of everything they had built. Dorothy Winters Barrett had stepped off that stagecoach in June of 1876 with nothing but hope and determination, an aging father and a trunk of belongings, not knowing what would await her. She had found Owen Barrett, a man whose heart was big enough to welcome strangers, whose word was good as gold, whose love was steady and true. Together, they had built not just a ranch, but a dynasty. Not just a marriage, but a partnership that weathered every storm. Not just a family, but a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. And as night fell over Downieville, over the Barrett Ranch, over the graves on the hillside, one truth remained constant, unchanging across all the years. Family is what makes a home. Not walls and a roof, not land and livestock, but people who choose each other, who commit to each other, who love each other through good times and bad. That truth, lived out so completely by Owen and Dorothy Barrett, continued to guide their descendants, continued to shape their family, continued to prove that the best things in life are built not on romance or passion, but on respect, partnership, kindness, and unwavering commitment to each other. The story that began with a frightened young woman on a stagecoach and a lonely rancher hoping for companionship had become something far greater than either could have imagined. It had become a testament to the power of choice, the importance of family, and the enduring strength of love built on solid foundations. And that story, that legacy, would continue for generations yet to come. A living reminder that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is take a chance on hope, welcome strangers into our lives, and build family, not from blood alone, but from choice and love and the simple, profound understanding that we all need each other, that none of us can make it alone, that family, true family, is what makes a home.